Alright class, I'm going to try to show you how to add CSS to our page to style it. So this is assuming that you have completed the HTML portion of our pizza style grilled cheese assignment. So you should have all the codes in here in HTML, including unordered lists and list items, and ordered lists and list items. Should have been the last things we did. Okay, assuming we completed all that, I want to show you some CSS that we can do. I'm going to start out by writing the CSS in the head of our document. When I say in the head, I just mean between the opening and closing head tags. I'm going to create an inordinate amount of space in here. I'm going to add a new tag, HTML tag, that just says style. And I'll move the closing style tag down here. So now I have opening and closing style tags, and I can write CSS in here. You can only write CSS in here. That is, in between the opening and closing style tags, or else your styles won't work. So again, CSS is what we use to style a page, and let me give you a brief example of what I mean by that. First of all, in order to style something on an HTML page, CSS needs to know what to style. And the way it does that is by having you pick out an HTML tag that you want to change. So I just wrote body. Let me close these brackets. Anything I write inside these opening and closing squiggly brackets for the body will affect its style, but I have to write it in CSS, of course. So I'm going to write the following: background color red. If I save my document and switch over to my browser and refresh, wow, that is red, definitely. I can, of course, enter orange, or if I really want to hurt my eyes, I can enter chartreuse, if I can spell it, chartreuse. That's what chartreuse looks like. Not very nice. I'm going to go with gray. For the handful of you that might know what hexadecimal codes are, you can type them in here, like FFCC 33 or something like that. It has to have the hashtag symbol before it. But let me undo. I'll just leave it at gray for now. There's a lot more we can explore here. So the basics of the syntax here are, say, the HTML tag, have the squiggly brackets, and then write your CSS in here. And background dash color is a good example of a CSS selector. Any CSS that uses more than one word is going to be connected with a dash. So background dash color, similar to font weight would be font dash weight, or lots of other examples that we'll see momentarily. Also note this is a colon and this is a semicolon. The semicolon is really important. That is, your code won't work without it. So that's pretty important. Okay, so we've changed the background of our page. Let's see, what else could we do? Well, there's a lot of stuff we could do. What if we wanted to center this headline? Put it right in the center of the page. Well, that, if I'm not mistaken, is an H1 tag. Yeah, here it is right down here. Pizza style grilled cheese. I hope you're not hungry while you're coding this. So I'm going to write H1. And then, let's see, text dash align center. If I save and refresh, it's in the center. Here, I want to change some other things. As you can see, our unordered list down here has little bullets to indicate, well, I don't know, a list, an unordered list. If we want to change those bullets, we can change the appearance of them. Those are, if I remember right, list items, right? Let's see, yeah, they're list items. They kind of have to be. So I could write a rule for LI. And the rule to change the appearance of the bullets is list style type. Now again, it's all dashes. After I type that in brackets, you'll see it's giving me a list of all of the possibilities. Some of these are very strange, and I've never used them, like decimal leading 0, or Georgian, or Lower Greek for that matter. I'm going to choose square. Add the semicolon, save, and refresh. And you can probably see that our dots have changed. But if I zoom in on my page, can you see that the list items changed for my unordered list, as well as for my ordered list? This is where I had numbers, and now I don't have those numbers anymore. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, that means when you write a CSS rule for, in this case, li, it's going to apply to every list item on the page. In that case, it would apply to all the list items that we wanted this to apply to, but also all the list items in the ordered list that we did not want it to apply to. So that leads to the obvious question, how do we specify that we just want to style the list items in an unordered list? Well, this is how you say ul space li. And if you read this backwards, that is from right to left, it would be every list item contained by an unordered list, as opposed to olli, which would be every list item contained by an ordered list. Well, that's not what we want. This is what we want. Let me save, refresh, and you can see it brings our numbers back, but it keeps our bullets as squares. So yay, I will chalk that up to victory. Let me zoom out of the page and get us back to where we left off. All right, let's move on. What else do I want you to style? Well, here's another cool one. We want to add borders underneath our H2 tags. I believe those are both H2 tags. Is that right? I'm referring to the phrases ingredients, yes, and directions. Okay, so that'll be really easy to do. We can write rules for H2 or all H2 tags on this page. So here's the code to add a border to the bottom of anything. We can say border dash bottom. There's that dash again. Then we have to specify three things. The size of the border, I'm going to say 2 pixels. The type of border, I will say dashed. And finally, the color of the border. So I'll say black. If I save that and refresh, well, you can see those dashed borders underneath. Let me show you what our other options would be. There's dotted, which is like so. I think I like that more. We can reduce the thickness of the dots by changing this to 1 pixel instead of 2 pixel, and that looks even better. Just so you know, you can go up really high on this, and you can also set the style of the border to be solid, which is probably the most common setting, although here it looks somewhat intimidating. So let me set this back to 1 pixel dotted. Yeah, I think that works just fine. So that's an interesting way to add a border to anything. You can add a border to most things. In this case, we did border bottom, just so you know you could do border top or border left and all those sorts of things. But I'm going to keep it border bottom because that is what we want on our page. So now I would like to change the font that we're using. Specifically, I'm going to try to change the font right here for pizza style grilled cheese. Well, first of all, I can say that's the H1 tag, right? We already aligned it to the center. So how do we change the font? Well, the first part of this is pretty straightforward. You say font dash family, and then you can specify a font. So I'll say Arial. And if I refresh, you can see it changes to Arial. Well, that's nice. If I wanted to do a font whose name had more than one word, I would have to put it in quotes. American Typewriter. I spell that right? Typewriter. Looks like it. So if I save and refresh, well, now we have that font. So that's pretty easy, right? But of course there is a complication. Here's the complication. Your computer may not have this font. I don't know what fonts your computer has. Let me speak more on this with some text I just scribbled here in brackets. Well, we need to use a web-safe font. A web-safe font is a font that you can safely assume every internet user has on their computer. Because again, every computer is going to have a different set of fonts. When you install programs like Word or Photoshop, your computer gains more fonts, but you can't assume that everyone's going to have those fonts because everyone doesn't have Photoshop or even Word. So using web-safe fonts is going to assure you as a developer that you're creating content that every end user is going to see in the same manner. So that leads to an obvious question. What are some web-safe fonts? Well, there's a website for that. There are, of course, a lot of websites for that, but this is the one I like the most, CSS Font Stack, or cssfontstack.com. I will try to remember to link to this page from our class blog, but it's pretty easy to find. So these are fonts broken up into general types of fonts that you can use safely on any website, and it should look just fine. You could probably see we've got right here Lucida Sans typewriter. Well, that's similar to the one I wanted to use. Let me go back to what I had. I was trying to use American typewriter. Let me paste this in. Lucida Sans typewriter and save that. If I switch back to my page and refresh, hey, that worked. Now we've got that funky looking font. Now that's not the same as American typewriter, but it is a typewriter font and it's kind of close. You may have noticed on this page that there are these little black bars that say copy to clipboard. Let me show you what that does. I'm going to click copy to clipboard. It gives me a little alert that it did. Let me go back here to where my font family rule is. I'm going to remove this because I did copy to clipboard. What I technically copied to the clipboard is that rule. So let me paste in what I copied from that website. And it's similar. Font family, Lucida Sans typewriter. But notice this. It's followed by a comma, and then it lists 1, 2, 3, 4 other fonts or types of fonts. Well, why is that? That is because if a person does not have font number 1, my first choice, it will try this font, the second option. If an end user doesn't have either of these fonts, it will try Monaco. Now, Monaco should work on just about everybody's computer, but if it still doesn't work, it will try this wacky named one. And if that still doesn't work, this is a general family of fonts, as we saw over here, monospaced fonts. It will just show whatever monospaced font it has on the system. So one of those has to work. It's essentially a fallback. Chances are about 99% of our users are going to see the exact font that I specified. But this is technically the correct way to specify a font. And again, if we switch back over to our page, it looks like it got our Lucida Sans typewriter just fine. Now we just changed the font for the H1 tag. What if we wanted to change it for our entire page? That is pretty easy. I'm going to take this rule for the H1 tag and cut and paste it, because I'm going to plug it in to the body tag. Remember, the body is the entire visible section of our page. So if I refresh, now the whole thing looks like that. Okay, well that's pretty different. I don't think it's too bad though. I want to do one more thing doing the CSS. Does everyone remember, hopefully, that this text right here, be careful not to overcook your pepperoni. We adjusted that text on our page with the strong and M tags, right? Now, I would make the argument that strong and M are styles. And based on what we learned earlier in this class, style is for CSS, right? It's not for HTML. Well, that's true. So the question becomes, if we were to remove this strong and this M, how would we get this text to look italicized and bold? Well, I'll tell you that in portions. Let me say this. We're going to have some sort of HTML, I don't know what it is yet, that we're going to change to be bold and italic. So if I remember right, let's see, that would be font-weight 900. 900 just means boldest. That's a kind of random scale that goes from 100 to 900. If I want to make this text italic, we would say font-style italic. And that would change whatever text to be bold and italic. But the problem is we need an HTML selector here, and I don't know which one to plug in. Well, let's scroll down to what it is we're trying to change. See, it has strong and M and strong. Well, first of all, I'm just going to separate this section a little bit. We don't need the strong tags or the M tags, right? We are doing that ourselves with CSS. So the question becomes, how do we tell the CSS to style this line? There is nothing controlling this line. There's nothing wrapped around it. That is, we can control the appearance of this A tag because everything's wrapped in an A tag. This isn't wrapped in anything. It's part of a larger P tag, but we want to make this entire paragraph bold and underlined, just this, right? So there's a fun little HTML tag we can use called span. Span doesn't do anything. That is, there are no default styles associated with it. It doesn't separate this content from the content above or below it. It'll look exactly the same. But what we can do now, if we go back up to our CSS, is say span font weight 900, font style italic. And if I save and refresh, this page looks exactly the same. Be careful not to overcook your pepperoni, but note that I removed the M and strong tags. Kind of interesting, huh? So I wanted to point out one other thing in regards to all this stuff. Remember, all these style rules that we just wrote are inside this opening and closing style tags in our HTML. Well, generally speaking, that isn't how we would like to work. That is, web design these days likes to take a modular approach. So you have HTML in an HTML document, and your CSS really should appear in a separate file that ends in .css. That is, it's its file's extension. And that's what I want to do. So here, I'm going to, in brackets, say file and new, and this creates a new blank document. Now at this point, this document doesn't have a name or a location or a file type. It's not even a CSS file. So the first thing I'm going to do is save this. File, save as, and I'm going to name it stylesheet.css. I can't just hit save, because by default, brackets wants to save into this getting started folder. I don't even think I can do that. I need to find my pizza project. So I believe mine's on the desktop and it's called Pizza Continued. There it is, so I'll hit save. So now if you look at the contents of your folder, if you're following along with me, you would see a style sheet right next to your HTML file. This leaves another step, which is linking the two. That is, pizza doesn't know to connect to stylesheet.css, so we have to tell it. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to switch back to pizza.html. Let me scroll up a little bit. We are in the head of our document, right? Let me go right before this style tag. All right. So in the head, I'm going to write the following. This one's a little long. Well, that's the rule. Let me walk you through this. First of all, the HTML tag we use here is link. And, you know, if I were master of the coding universe, I would make it so this is used for links instead of the A tag. But that's not the way this is coded. That's all right. Hey, English is weirder than this, right? Rel equals style sheet and type equals text/CSS. These are just indications to the browser of the type of file that we're linking to and the role that it plays. And then href equals stylesheet.css. Well, this probably makes some sense to you based on what we learned from links. Remember, href tells you where to find an external file. And in this case, we can just write stylesheet.css because it's in the exact same place. That is, if there was a folder called CSS that our file was inside, we would have to say css/stylesheet.css. But again, I don't want to do that because it's complicated. It's unnecessarily complicated. So let me get things back to the way they were. And we just have style sheet. Now there would be one more step involved in this, and that would be moving all of our CSS rules from our HTML document into our style sheet. I'm going to cut these out. You can see that I left the opening and closing style tags. That's important. We do not want them in our style sheet. In fact, if they're in our style sheet is not going to work. Let me take our style sheet, which should still be blank, drag it into brackets, and paste. Okay, so there's body, H1. I'm just spacing out these rules so they're a little easier to rule. We've got read 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 5 different CSS selectors. That's not so bad. I'm just cleaning things up a little bit. Let me save that. Now, in theory, if I go back to pizza and save it, I should be able to refresh my page and it looks exactly the same. If you tried to do this with me and your page did not look exactly the same, then a bunch of things could happen. Could have happened, I should say. For one thing, you definitely need to make sure this is coded correctly. Don't forget all those quotes. Second of all, remember these style tags? We don't need them anymore. And more importantly, in our style sheet, we definitely can't have them. So in other words, if you copied and pasted it, and when you did so, you copied over these HTML tags, that will render all of your CSS unreadable. So make sure you do not have those. Other than that, unless you have a really complicated program, problem, rather, it should have worked. And if it didn't, just let your instructor know, I guess. So that's a very general overview of how to restyle this page so it looks different. I encourage you folks to play around with CSS beyond what we've done just here. I believe that there's a pretty good Linda tutorial. I don't know if this is it. Oh my gosh, it is. It's almost like I planned for this. This is called CSS Fundamentals. It's a pretty good walkthrough of what CSS looks like and how it works. If this whole concept is really challenging to you, I would encourage you to start at Chapter 1, the CSS basics, and follow through this. But if you wanted to get right down to just the nitty-gritty, you can go down to Chapter 3, and this shows you how to do some of the things that we are doing so far. Additionally, I wanted to say, if you wanted to style this page beyond what I have done so far and what's written in your assignments rubric, feel free to do so. Go nuts, and definitely don't feel like you have to make yours look like mine. So if you don't like this gray background color or this typewriter font, I encourage you to use something else.